So this one's pretty self-explanatory, really. They're basically, Stalag 17 came along, and it was basically when you didn't really see that many POW movies. And then I think like exactly 10 years later is when The Great Escape was, and The Great Escape kind of really brought the whole genre to like mass attention, and it's the one that a lot of people consider The Great Escape to be the essential one. But I think with Stalag 17's existence, that's to be debated, which I guess is what this video is for.
Hence the term versus.
Typically, we don't really utilize the actual term. We just kind of, hey, here's a couple of movies that are like we're going to talk about.
we do in the description, but that's about it.
All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and start with Stalag 17 because it came first, I guess. And so yes, as it begins, obviously it starts with Cookie's narration, and he's actually telling us directly, the audience, we're watching this because no movies have been made about POWs at this particular time, and it was Billy Wilder who appointed himself to do such a thing, who was the he was also the co-writer and adapting it as well. And this is one of those movies that I don't know if it was just my school or what, but or if this is a movie that is often shown in schools. It might have just been particular to that one teacher, I'm not positive, but that's I had seen this before that, and then after that, I kind of went for a while. It's always a movie that always stuck with me, but it was a long time before I revisited it again. And this is one of those movies where even though you have a really decent plot, where it's all the guys in the POW camp after they've been captured, and one of them is a mole for the officers or whatever, that's basically giving them all the information of all the ways they're sneaking stuff in or trying to escape or whatever. This informant amongst them will let the powers that be know, and people will be punished accordingly, sometimes excessively. And it's basically them trying to figure out who that infiltrator is, while also just living the mundane life of a prisoner of war. And despite all that, and despite the fact that we have Billy Wilder's Oscar-nominated direction, it was a lone director nomination, there was no picture nomination, which typically kind of makes it a bigger deal when a director's nominated without the picture nomination. And the thing here is that regardless of all this stuff, like the subject matter, the plot, and all that, the one thing that really, really makes Stalag 17 stand out is its characters. Like, when you really think about it, it's not really the plot that you remember about the movie when you haven't seen it for a while. It's all about those different characters that you could identify in any crowd of other characters. Starting with William Holden as Sefton, who won the Best Actor Oscar for this, which for starters is, and it's a great win, especially since he was up against the From Here to Eternity guys, which would have been a big, obstacle in that race. But the fact that he won in leading not even just him, this performance won in leading, but that anybody would win in leading when pretty much all the characters and performances in this movie stand out in their own way. Like, to me personally, one doesn't really stand out above the other, because regardless of the ensemble we have, it feels like almost everybody is front and center at one point or another. For the most part. There's some guys that are always only background, but even so, I feel like it's very much kind of, I never really felt like there was a lead character, even though that he does have, a lot going for him, like the whole, when they're talking about, he's basically at the end, when we really get to the point when, spoiler alert, Peter Graves is outed as the mole. Sefton basically becomes like the detective in a whodunit. He's basically like the dude that's kind of calls out everything and knows how everything connects and is able to point to the guilty one. And basically we get that scene in this. And he is that character. But we also get those moments where he has a lot of build-up around him. He's the one where he has all different ties. Like, he trades in his cigarettes for eggs, and he seems to have this kind of system with the guards and the people in charge that the others don't have. And then he has this character built up through the other characters, how he's built up almost in like a legend kind of way, where he's basically saying if he was a book character, he'd be one of the most interesting characters in literature or something. And just how we kind of see this character progress in the way that where he starts and then where he ends up at the end, and kind of how the camaraderie happens and all that. How he goes from being kind of this legend among men to an outcast to basically almost to their leader, more or less. Once everything is when everything is falling into place and he's the only one that really knows what's going on. But on top of him, we also have Robert Strauss, who got, I think that's his name, Animal, who got a supporting actor nomination. And this is definitely one of those characters that you always remember, no matter how many times you've seen the movie, because he's the comedy relief, and it's actually to a point to where, I mean, it's multiple characters in the movie, like Shapiro and him kind of working together, as among many others. This movie has so much comedy relief in it that I even struggle to say that they're comedy relief, because a lot of the times this movie just actually feels like a straight out comedy, regardless of its subject matter. And I always kind of, and they do have, those really memorable funny moments, like the how they serve each other potato soup for breakfast, and then whatever remaining potato soup is left after everybody has eaten, it gets used to wash clothes. And Animal's always late and always gets to it after socks have already been put into it. The volleyball scene that has kind of a double thing going on, where obviously it's the distraction as well as, what they're using in order to use the radio. And then there's the moment where the guard shows up and he's like really stern and hardened, and he's like practically, we're in like, this Nazi era. And so they just toss him the ball once, and then voila, he's like really, really into it. And it's just like the perfect distraction from then on. And there's also a lot of stuff where the movie does a lot of impressive juggling, because it has to be, obviously a lot of the movie is really funny, to the point that you could almost put it in the genre of comedy. But obviously, given the subject matter, there will be moments that are dark, or moments that are sad, or something. And sometimes these kind of, like, are in the same place. Like, there are scenes that are funny and sad kind of at the same time. Like, this might mostly be funny, but there's a sadness to it when Shapiro puts the hay under his hat to look like a woman. And throughout the entire movie, Animal has had this obsession with Betty Grable and wanting to marry her. And when he sees Shapiro with the wig, he sees Betty Grable. And when Shapiro reveals it to be him, it's like, Animal should have known that, but at the same time that he was so convinced he was in another place, it's sad simultaneously. And that's kind of the genius of that performance, too. And then there's the guy, when, obviously he's been in this prison for quite some time, and he gets the letter from his wife, who says, I'm pregnant, I'm gonna have a baby, but it's weird. No, she's already had the baby, but it just showed up on her doorstep. And it's like, that's weird, isn't it? And then he's like, oh yeah, that's great, yeah. And then it's like, he kind of knows it's a lie, but and then we see him again in the movie, and he's still debating it with himself. He's like, yeah, that's exactly what happened. It's like, you feel bad for the guy, but the way they play it off is really funny, even though it's terrible. And that, from Wilder, is, like, back in the day, obviously, as Cookie tells us in the beginning, there really weren't POW movies in this time, at least not a lot, and they weren't really, put forth in front of other movies or as famous or whatever. So for Wilder to take this approach and basically make it this movie that really brings this part of history out into the light, and to make it practically a comedy, that's a damn gamble. That's that's really really ballsy. But it also shows a real confidence too, that he knew how people would react to this, and that they would find stuff funny when it's funny and sad when it's sad, or both when it's both. And we knew at this point that Wilder kind of knew an audience. Obviously, we know what Wilder became following this movie, and he just got, you know, more and more, just The Apartment and Some Like It Hot, and I just had like his whole filmography in my head, and now it just vanished. Sunset Boulevard, just any of the great movies you can think of in the era of the 50s and 60s. There's a pretty good chance Billy Wilder's name's on it somewhere. And that's just the thing, is it's also kind of, I really like that it's played in school, or at least the school I went to. I still don't know on this, the jury is still out. Because it is really educational while also being extremely accessible. Like, even though it's an older movie about a POW camp, that won an Oscar, that you can, like, if you say that to somebody, they'd probably be immediately put off by it, but if they watch this, I feel like it's a movie any audience could get into, because it's just doing so much, and it really has that kind of light quality to it. Even our kind of antagonist, who's like the warden, who is Otto Preminger, there's just something, even though he's evil, and he's like, you know, the commandant of this place, there's still something kind of joyous about his character, like when he's, like, joyous in his evilness, I guess. Like, the moment when he's talking about how it's gonna be a white Christmas, and he says, just like the one you used to know, and he's like, it's like that song from that man who stole his name from our capital. So, like, even characters like that, the whole movie just has this really, you know, upbeat quality to it, regardless of its subject matter, which is really interesting. Just given how funny it actually is. But it's not afraid to go to those dark places and remind you of what these places were like. Maybe not to the extreme that we've seen in later movies, because obviously later movies can show more, but obviously you're not going to get Schindler's List out of this or anything. Not in 1953. So yeah, but the way he kind of introduced mass audiences to it through comedy, is kind of a genius move, and totally something you would suspect of him. So, I think that's why, and it's got, like, even, like, today, like, the people that I talk to today that have seen it, 9 times out of 10, it's one of their favorite movies. So, and it's one of those cases where my thing was to basically go to the video store and get different ones every time. So basically, my goal was to see every movie ever made, which, as you can see, I'm still working on. But this is one of the few movies that I kept getting, that I got more than once. I got it maybe 3 or 4 times, and it was, yeah, just because it's a really good movie to revisit, and it's insane how all that, even though we've seen movies now like Schindler's List, where we really see just the absolute worst these places have to offer, and that this movie that's mostly a comedy can still be relevant and be seen by many people today multiple times over, really, really says something about it. And if you see the movie, and you haven't yet, I think you'll quickly find out why that is. So, yes. Going on now to the much more famous one, which is The Great Escape. Which obviously is, obviously the face of the movie, as you can clearly see, is Steve McQueen. And he's the one that's kind of always, he's the connotation you make with this movie. You tend to forget just how stacked this cast is. This movie has fucking everybody in it. Well, for starters, you do have McQueen, who is, you know, this is, I think, how everybody kind of views McQueen and sees him as the person that he is in movie history when you look back on him, really, really starts at this movie and then worked forward into the rest of his filmography. and it's because he's that character that we see in so many prison movies now, where he's the guy that's always trying to get out, but at the same time, it's almost like he doesn't mind being in. So it's he's the guy that's always going to solitary, and it's just like it's an everyday thing for him, and he doesn't care. As long as he has his baseball and his glove, he's good to go. He just uses that time to plot, and he's very, very patient about it. And so he kind of has that, and then there's the whole he's so like from the first moment he's there, he's so nonchalant about the whole experience of being in that prison. Like when he's just when he gets caught doing it, and he's just like, well, I was trying to cut through your wires because, I want to get out of here. He just straight up tells that to a guard. He's like, yeah, I was just trying to get out because I want to get out. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. And then there's the moment when he's first taken to solitary, and he slips like the keys off the guard, and then just kind of hands them back to him just to show that he can do that. So I mean, you can say he got caught and then he handed the keys back, but I like to think he gave the keys back just to show the guard that he could do that if he wanted to. And obviously with McQueen here, it's worth noting that this is obviously not the first time he worked with this director. This is John Sturges, who did the original the original Magnificent Seven. Obviously, not Seven Samurai, but there's that whole thing. He did the Magnificent Seven that McQueen is in, and a few people returned from that. Are also in that cast. Bronson and James Coburn are in this as well. Bronson as the guy who digs the tunnels, but he's claustrophobic. Go figure. Yes, believe it or not, Charles Bronson had phobias. You wouldn't expect it, but yes, that dude was actually scared of things from time to time in his movies. Somebody who really stands out, who's like basically the major supporting player here, apart from after McQueen, is Richard Attenborough, who is the dude that's basically kind of running the operation more or less, while McQueen's kind of like a mastermind. And the thing about Attenborough here is that people kind of have a face that they put with him now, with Jurassic Park, followed by Chris Columbus's remake of Miracle on 34th Street. That's kind of the face most people associate with Richard Attenborough, and there's parts like Hammond and Santa Claus and all that. But people tend to not realize that back in the day, he was like an insanely good, very, very diverse actor with stuff like 10 Rillington Place, where he like out Peter Lorre's Peter Lorre, and it's a really creepy ass movie where he's like this serial killer or whatever. And then there's stuff like Seance on a Wet Afternoon, where he upstaged Kim Stanley, I thought. And then there's like the original Flight of the Phoenix, a whole vast filmography, and he was just really, really good, especially in this era. And he kept that up here. There's also Donald Pleasance as the guy he's the forger, and he's kind of slowly going blind as the movie progresses, to the point that he can barely see in front of his face when it comes time to escape. And he almost gets left behind, but luckily James Garner is there to have his back. And James Garner in this movie is basically kind of reminds me, I mean, you could say this about McQueen, obviously, but honestly, I feel like it's Garner in this movie that most evokes Holden in Stalag 17. Where he's like the slick, good-looking guy, and he has the connections and kind of has that, back and forth with the guards, where he can basically get what he wants. But there are those moments where he has like internal competition, like he's that guy, where it's like he's talking with that guard about how he was a Boy Scout once, and the guy was like, oh, I was a Boy Scout as well, I got 19 badges, and Garner's that guy that goes, oh, that's cool, I got 20. He's that guy. And that kind of relationship he has with Pleasance in the last act of the movie is really good, powerful stuff that you don't really see coming when you watch the rest of the movie. But the way he's the one that sticks up for him, and they kind of, go down together, I always thought was really great. There's also the character Ives, the guy that McQueen kind of starts this off with. And Ives is one of those characters where he's this really kind of attention-grabbing supporting character, and he's great. But the thing is as soon as you meet him, and you realize how likable he's gonna be, you know immediately how ill-fated he is. Like, as soon as you he almost dies when we are introduced to him when they're trying to get out in the trucks with the trees, and they're, like, pitchforking them to get the guys out. And it's like, sooner or later that pitchfork's gonna hit, metaphorically or, for real, literally. And the great thing about this movie is you might be intimidated by, if you don't know any better, most people obviously know this movie front to back, but if you're unaware, the length might intimidate you. It is 3 hours long. But the thing about it is it rarely screws around. This movie is 3 hours long. They're plotting how to get out of the prison like 15 minutes into the movie. And it just goes from there. It's just the escape and the aftermath just takes that long. But it really just goes by because of just how it just keeps moving. Like, it doesn't take the time to screw around. And we know the characters are portrayed by the actors well enough, and just little things are thrown out here and there, that when push comes to shove, we don't need like a whole lot of backstory exposition on them to want them to get out. We're just kind of what we're given is all we need to just attach ourselves to them and just go with it. Especially the post-escape scenes when it starts to catch up to them. And once again, not to the extent of Stalag 17, obviously, but there are definitely much lighter, upbeat moments in this as well. Like, for instance, when McQueen takes the boards out from the bunk beds, and that guy comes in not knowing any better, just whistling Christmas music, I think, and he just jumps on the top bunk and just crashes all the way through. It's this random slapstick moment in a movie like The Great Escape. But for some reason, it just fits the whole attitude the movie has going from that point. And sometimes the tone can feel a little off in regards to that upbeat quality. Like, one scene that never really sat right with me necessarily was that, like the moment when the dude gets gunned down on the train tracks after he gets caught. And, like, he's laying dead on the train tracks, and then we dissolve into the next scene, and, like, the upbeat music is playing again, and we're just going right back into the next scene. It's kind of like that. I think we could have lingered on that a little more. That's one of our fallen people there. But, that's what it is. And that's the thing about this movie, though, is that, despite all the death and the carnage and all that, it really tries its best to remain upbeat about everything. Even when everybody's getting, like, executed at the end. It's still really kind of got that moment, and McQueen the ending of the movie is McQueen just getting caught again after all of that. But there's just something because we know this is just going to kind of be an ever-going thing, whether it be ill-fated or not, is up to us, I guess. I think there was like some really not trying very hard sequel or something, like a TV sequel or something. It doesn't matter. I don't even know anything about it. Just that it might exist. But still, the main thing is that just this classic status that it's reached, that mainly comes from the fact that this is a 3-hour movie. And like every single scene in it is a classic in one way or another. Obviously, probably the most well-known scene in it is the scene of McQueen on the bike jumping the barrier. Even though he still ends up getting caught in that scene, it's still this really big triumphant moment. And the way these scenes are shot outside of it too, the way they kind of do the contrast of everything is so confined in the prison, like everybody's in solitary, or Bronson's in the tunnels, and everything is so closed in. And then when they finally escape and get on the outside, everything looks like huge and massive and grand and all that. All the mountains and the hills and all that. It's like the sets from The Sound of Music that he's riding this bike through. And so it's really just as entertaining even after the escape. And it manages to really, really keep all that up. Now, it's as far as choosing, I do have like a soft spot for Stalag 17. I do, But I can totally appreciate just how, nonstop and, no bullshit that The Great Escape is. And it has all those classic moments. And a cast that really, really could not have been better, especially in that time period. Like, this cast is so overwhelmingly great. And I love that also, even though we're not screwing around and all that, it is nice that this length gives time for all those characters to actually have something to do. Like, you have this list of, McQueen and Garner and Richard Attenborough and Donald Pleasance, Charles Bronson, James Coburn, all of them. And you think, like, nowadays, at least 2 of those people would get sidelined. And you'd be like, oh, I wish they'd used that person more. They really wasted that good actor. This movie uses everybody. And in just the right way. And it's perfectly, every character is perfectly cast with these amazing, and it's one of those cases too where you think it might take away with all the recognizable faces. Number one, that's not the case, and number two, there are also plenty of unrecognizable faces that play major parts that are really great here as well. But it really is an unbeatable cast. But as far as Stalag 17 being able to balance a lot of the other stuff, it may not be as exciting as The Great Escape. Like, Stalag 17 may focus more on the mundane, but it does so in a comic fashion, which adds flair to it anyway. And just the story going on in general, I think, is really... I like the way it kind of adds some suspense in scenes, especially when he kind of slowly starts to figure out that it's Peter Graves is the fucking... is the fucking guy. How we kind of get some suspense and all that. And it just feels so... I like how confined it is. It really, really plays into the kind of movie it is and the story it's telling. And the fact that it was one of the first to do it and in such a fashion is really impressive. That they were like, we're just going to do it that way and see what happens. And it came out better than they probably ever could have thought, I would think. Except Wilder. I feel like Wilder really had the confidence. It's like, he knew he was making something great. So, yes.
So, in another edition of Versus next week, your comment is actually going to be... Jazz. Yes.
I said this video might get all of 2 views, the Jazz one, but I feel like those 2 people might appreciate it.
Yes. Continue to watch the other segments here on the Podcast Network. It is Survivor Series weekend, which obviously means that we have podcasts coming up and already have been done. Tonight is Survivor Series. Last night was NXT TakeOver Toronto. We got Raw on Monday, Wednesday Wrestling Podcast on Wednesday, and the final Halloween Horror Nights 26 podcast next Friday night, time to be announced. So, that being said, I want to thank you guys and girls out there for watching. AJ, any parting words?
That's it.